Yes, that's right. Welcome to episode 5 of In the Car with Paddy, and I've been told by my chief financial officer and my head of HR, that would be my wife, that I'm not allowed to put out 25-minute videos anymore. So I promise this video will be less than 10 minutes. So today, obviously, everybody's talking about tariffs, and I'm pretty sure everybody understands how tariffs work. But for those youngsters who grew up in a more modern open trade environment, you can't remember what protectionist trade policies looked and felt like. I thought I'd just explain very quickly. You probably already heard this. A tariff is definitely not a tax on the country that is exporting an item, although some economists, predominantly from about 100 years ago, believe that that is the case. And because what obviously happens is I export something to the US, like a pound of Wagyu steak. See, I said pound there because it was US. And they, at the point of entry into the country, to whoever I'm selling the item to, so let's say I'm selling it to Gary's Steak Emporium distributors or something based in New York, well, Gary has to pay me what I want him to pay, 25 Australian dollars a kilo or a pound or whatever it is, and then he has to pay the US government an import tax, otherwise called a tariff. And he might push back on me and say, hey, listen, you're going to have to drop your prices because I've got to pay this import tariff, or this tariff now. But the reality is it's very, very unusual that actually works. I might take some of the hit to remain competitive, but that's going to usually only be the case if I'm really, really locked at the hip to that particular market. If I can sell my product elsewhere, I'll just say, sorry, Gary, that's the price. All the best, and I'll sell my product elsewhere. Now, this stuff worked really well in the early part of the 20th century, these protectionist policies. And protectionist policies were very common in Australia through most of the 19th century and right into some of the 20th century. But our good man Bob Hawke and Paul Keating and John Button, who was the industry minister at the time in their government, did quite a lot to break all that down. But let me go back. These policies did work, and they were very good for the economies that put them in place back in those days. But trade environments generally weren't extraordinarily fluid back then. And I love using terms like fluid, but what it basically means was it was much harder in those days to buy and sell stuff. And when you bought and sold stuff across borders and across countries and across oceans, it was a much longer process. Took a long time to set it up. You didn't just go shopping around quite as easily. Today, if I want to buy 50 kilos of Wagyu meat, and I'm buying it from somebody in Japan, for example, because I don't like the Australian Wagyu meat, and then suddenly Japan, the price goes up for whatever reason, I could probably buy Wagyu meat from Argentina. And even as a small, tiny meat importer in Australia, maybe I'm just buying it for my restaurant, I could just go online and I could find an Argentinian meat distributor and I can email them and say, hey, can you sell me 50 kilos? Now, they probably want to sell me more than 50 kilos, but for the sake of the argument, I say, can you sell me 50 kilos? And they'll give me a price and we'll work out some freight arrangements, and I'll pay them via a credit card or something like that, and they'll get the money instantly, and hopefully about a week later 50 kilos of Argentinian Wagyu steak will get delivered to my house. You couldn't do that in 1913. It was a much harder proposition. So today the world is an open market. The internet has connected buyers and sellers everywhere, and I mean, obviously these tariffs are aimed at much larger manufacturing organizations, you know, car manufacturers and things like that. But still, at the end of the day, the concept is the same. If I want to buy a car today, I can go out. There's literally about 50 brands that I can buy a car from And if they don't actually have a local retail outlet, otherwise called a dealership, that I can go to, I can just do it online. My wife's Tesla, that's right, I'm calling it my wife's Tesla now because she's the only one that drives it. We never went to a dealership. We bought that thing online. We never spoke to anybody from Tesla or saw a brand new Tesla in the flesh until the day we picked it up. I did my own test driving through people I knew that owned Teslas. I went and drove their Teslas, and all my communication with Tesla was over email. So yeah, it's a very open and fluid market. So anyway, getting back to that point, so tariffs. So why would you bring in a tariff? Why would Trump, or the clown, bring in a tariff structure in 2025? Look, he can say all sorts of things. He can say it's to punish this country, or it's to get them to pay, or it's whatever. You can listen to your own version of what he says. I can assure you that's not what it's about. He's basically saying whatever he has to say in front of the cameras. Again, as I've said before, the people behind him that are actually constructing the economic policies that he's doing a ham-fisted job of putting in place are seeing this as the easiest taxation system that they can implement without being 100% directly blamed for implementing what we would call in Australia a consumption tax. We have GST in Australia, so when you buy an item, apart from a few exceptions like fresh food, you pay a 10% tax on that item. The US economy now, the US consumer now has a very similar structure. They basically buy a product that happens to have been manufactured in China, and heaps of stuff is manufactured in China. They now get, I don't know, I couldn't even keep up with the rates this morning. Was it a 38% or 40% tariff? I have no idea. So that shirt that they buy from Walmart or whatever that was made in China, it just went up by, didn't go up by 34 because the 34% is applied at the cost at the point of import, and there are obviously margins that are applied after that. But if the shirt costs $10 to the importer, then $3.40 gets added. So that importer now, it's now costing them $13.40 to bring that shirt into the country. They then pass that on to the distributor, who then sells it to Walmart, and at each point of the way, everyone's adding margins. So the shirt ends up getting sold for $20, whereas in the old days before the tariff, it might have been sold for $18 or $15 or whatever. I don't know what it is, but anyway, it's not a median running all the way through. But the point being is, how do you whack the American consumer with a huge consumption tax without being blamed for adding a huge consumption tax? The way you do that is via tariffs, because then when people say, oh, I don't like this, all my things have gone up in price, the clown can turn around and say, well, you should buy American. And they will, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to save American industry. You should buy American. And that person that was buying a $15 shirt at Walmart will go, there are no American shirt manufacturers selling shirts for $15. I can go and buy a Van Heusen shirt, which is made in China anyway, or I can go and buy, I don't know, I couldn't tell you a brand that makes shirts in America. I'm sure there are a few, but they ain't selling them at $15. That's like your $90, maybe $120, $130, really nice, kind of shirts I buy, like this lovely little Tommy Hilfiger item here, which again was made in China. But anyway, point being is, I heard a very interesting thing the other day, and I'm running out of time, so I've got to wrap this up. Heard a very interesting thing the other day that said capital migration in manufacturing takes between 7 to 15 years. So if you are a manufacturer of, let's say Tommy Hilfiger, you're making Tommy Hilfiger shirts, and they're all being made in China, and as a result of Donald Trump, the clown's policies, and you think, oh, I should start moving my manufacturing back into America, it's not probably going to work. But let's say you made that decision and you say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to move my factory that I've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in, or I'm going to move my contracted manufacturing that I have contracted out for years to come in China. I'm going to move that back into a factory that doesn't currently exist in America, so I'm going to need to get somebody else to build a factory, or I'm going to have to build a factory. Anyway, that process is going to take you between 7 to 15 years. That's 4 presidential terms away. So I don't know who the president's going to be in 4 terms. It's not going to be the clown, because I wish him all the best. I really do. He's a lovely man, but he's carrying a bit of weight, aren't we all? He ain't going to be alive in 16 years. He's not going to make it into his late 90s, I'm afraid. So it won't be the clown that sees this wonderful day that manufacturing returns to the US. And in all reality, this stuff's not going to last much more than about another year, because, as I've said before, they're going to hit the midterms next year, and they are going to get wiped out. I mean, a little thing like that judges election in Wisconsin has demonstrated the voters are already turning. What was already a very, very slim margin, you didn't need a very big swing for the clown to lose his political equity, but he has used all of his political equity up in the first 90 days, not even 90 days. So that's all over. They're going to get wiped out at the midterms. Manufacturers are just going to say, well, we're not going to sell much into the US over the next 12 to 18 months until they decide to undo the tariffs. The other reason, one last thing, I lied about the 10 minutes. The other point about tariffs is, the other reason you put tariffs in, particularly against friendly countries like Australia, where he's put the baseline of 10% in. He says that we have a 10% tariff on US products. We don't have a 10% tariff on US products. We have a GST that we charge on everything, regardless of where it's made or where it's grown. And he calls that a tariff. He says, well, if one of my companies imports something into Australia and then you charge a 10% tax on that, that's a tariff. It's not. It's a consumption tax paid on all items by all consumers at the till. So, he's just making things up. And I'm led to believe that some of the other numbers he was quoting about Europe having a 32% tariff and Korea having a 50% tariff, these are all extrapolations on the actual trade surplus versus deficit with those countries. So don't believe everything you hear, unless you watch Sky News or listen to 2GB. Then it doesn't really matter what you think, because you're just swallowing garbage. But anyway, they'll tell you whatever you want to hear. Anyway, the other thing with a tariff is that you're inventing a negotiation chip. You're saying, I'm going to put a 10% tariff on Australia, and then sometime over the next year or two, there's a conversation between Australia and the US, probably to do with defence, probably to do with the Navy parking a lot of their submarines in Australian ports. I don't know, it could be any number of things. And the clown will say, well, I'll tell you what, you do me a favour and I'll remove that 10% chip. So the one thing to remember here is, don't fall for that trick, Prime Minister, whoever is the Prime Minister after May the 3rd, because that's just a setup. And even though I think Peter Dutton's a bit of a clown, I don't think even he's that dumb to fall for that trick. And I know that Albo's not that dumb, so that's just a negotiation tactic. The other thing I was going to say as well is, this is all running into a federal election here, and I'm already seeing, particularly on LinkedIn, I'm already seeing people pick up and run with talking points based on Donald Trump policies. 2 people today on LinkedIn were making posts about, why does the federal government have an education department? We shouldn't have an education department. We should just leave it to the states. Oh, no. We're not doing that, okay? Every child in Australia, regardless of where they're born, deserves to have access to a decent education system. Unless, of course, you're born in an Aboriginal mission, and then you're shit out of luck. But everybody else gets access to a decent education. So you send it back to the states, which was the way it used to work, and you'll suddenly find people in certain states, I won't mention them by name, but I was born in one of those states, you'll find people in those states just don't get access to quite the same standard of education that people in, say, Victoria or New South Wales get. So we have a federally funded education system. The money comes from the federal government. It's put towards certain components of the education system, and then the states implement the curriculums. And even that's relatively standardized. But yes, today on LinkedIn, people are saying, oh, we don't need a federal education system. Nobody in their right mind in Australia was making anything like this kind of suggestion before that idiot in the White House got into power and started throwing around ridiculous policies on behalf of the very nasty people behind him who don't give a shit about federal education departments, because they're going to send their children to the finest private schools and the finest colleges, and it doesn't really matter anyway if their kids are educated, because they're all going to inherit their billions of dollars. But that's another point. But watch out, we're in the final 4 weeks of an election campaign. You're going to start seeing people talking up Donald Trump policies, and as you know, I'm no fan of Peter Dutton, but that's what Peter Dutton is all about. It's what the Liberals are all about. Not all the Liberals, but a lot of the Liberals who are in the powerful part of the party at the moment. They want to implement a Trump-style campaign and a Trump-style administration in Australia. And people like Gina Rinehart and Clive Palmer are 100% behind that. Watch out, Australia. Trumpism is about, and it's up to you to keep a wary eye. Bye.